Good morning, everyone. Welcome back, and thank you all for joining us once again for the Fifth Avenue Synagogue Sunday Speaker Series. This morning, we have the distinct opportunity to hear from Mr. Mark Meadows, former White House Chief of Staff and Congressman. I want to thank you for your service to our country and for carving out some time today. We know you have many other obligations and commitments. And we also want to publicly thank you for your commitment and your dedication to the state of Israel and everything you've done to this important country throughout your time in office. To formally introduce Mr. Meadows will be Attorney David Schoen. And David really needs no introduction. He's a well-known individual, either because he served as Donald Trump's defense attorney during the second impeachment, or just maybe, I'm just throwing this out there, maybe it's because he spoke to our community a few weeks ago and his fame just skyrocketed since then. But all joking aside, your presentation a few weeks ago was one of the highlights of our year, and people are still discussing it. And we want to thank you for that presentation, as well as serving as a symbol to the Jewish world about your commitment to your values while you are committed to your work commitments as well. And President Jacob Gold will introduce to this morning's, will moderate this morning's program. And I want to use this opportunity to thank Jacob for all of his efforts to put together this Sunday speaker series. It takes a lot of time and effort, and Jacob is investing a tremendous amount of time to organize it. We also want to thank Jacob for serving as one of the leading forces in the synagogue renovations that's currently taking place, as well as many other projects that he is working on. So thank you once again, Jacob, for all your efforts for our community. I've got kindly call upon David Schoen to formally introduce this morning's speaker.
Thank you very much. I'll tell you, it was a great honor for me to appear in this program before. I really very much enjoyed it, and I heard a lot of great things afterwards, and I knew a lot of great things about this shul. But it's also a great honor for me today to be able to introduce Congressman Meadows. You know him, I guess, most recently as one of the greatest chiefs of staff we've had, although too short-lived. But I know him more as probably the greatest friend of Israel in Congress when he sat in Congress. I have a friend who appeared before on a panel that appeared before Congressman Meadows, and he tells me stories about how he knew he was in safe territory with Congressman Meadows on the panel. And in fact, not only did he know all of the issues inside and out, but he took to task those purported friends of Israel who were really nothing of the kind, who then spoke on the panel and really undercut Israel's position. So he's been a great friend of Israel forever, and we miss him very much in Congress. Need him as much as ever now with this renewed funding going on for UNRWA and for the PLO and PA, I believe directly is going to happen in violation of the Taylor Force Act and so on. But I have to tell you just this personal story, and then I'll let you hear from the star of the show. About 2 weeks before the impeachment trial, I got a telephone call just after a Sunday dinner from then Chief of Staff Meadows. And I was shocked, to say the least. I didn't expect to be called by the Chief of Staff, but I have to tell you, he was one of the most humble and gracious people I've ever had the pleasure of speaking with on the phone. He introduced himself, just said, "This is Mark Meadows," and he's asked if this was a good time for me to talk. I thought that it was a pretty good time for me to talk to the Chief of Staff, the President of the United States. So I took the call right away, of course, and we talked for quite a while, just getting to know each other. And then Chief of Staff Meadows asked me if I would be interested in considering representing the President in the impeachment process. So again, to say as an understatement, asked whether I would be interested in doing it. I certainly was interested. And then I've told this story a couple of times. Certainly my family was all very impressed with his phone call. But I said to him that I would be very interested, but I'd like to know who would be on the team. There'd be some people I probably wouldn't be that comfortable serving with. So he frankly asked me who wouldn't I want to serve with? I said, listen, I really don't want to risk offending one of your friends. I always remember this. Chief of Staff Meadows said to me, listen, I work in Washington, D.C. If you want a friend in Washington, D.C., get a dog. Just tell me who it is you prefer not to work with, and we'll figure it out. So I mentioned a couple names, and he said, well, they're not on the team. So he said he would call me back the next day with the president. And the president then called me later on that evening, actually, and things went forward from there. It was just a delightful experience. When I got to Washington, D.C., I had one of my sons with me. I'm not sure that Chief of Staff Meadows would remember it, but again, it was another monumental moment for us. He was so gracious that he came before the presentation in Washington and introduced himself both to my son and to me. And my son certainly will never forget it, and I'll never forget it. Just an extraordinary human being, as gracious and humble as you can find, delightful to be around, but probably most importantly for this group and for our country, I think, one of the greatest friends of Israel we have, and we got to get him back in public service very soon, in my view. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, David, thank you. I mean, I am truly humbled by your introduction. I can tell you that not only are you an unbelievable attorney, but you're an unbelievable human being. And you know what impresses me most about you is that your faith, your love for mankind, and actually your respect for others. You know, when you look at people and you not only admire them for who they are, but for what they stand for. It is a great time. So I thank you for that kind introduction. I'm a huge fan, as you know. The president is a huge fan of yours, and I look forward to sharing a little bit more about what we can do together. And so, for those that have tuned in, I think the real key is that we should not despair. I mean, history throughout the history of our world, we've had really unbelievably difficult times, and even if you go back and look at the Jewish people and the persecution, the trials that have happened throughout history, you know, sometimes we can look at our current situation and think that we're in a very, very difficult time, which we are. There's no denying. But you know, I just still believe that God still reigns over the affairs of nations. And so, Rabbi David, thank you for the introduction. Rabbi, thank you for allowing me to share a little bit of who I am. Again, with Fifth Avenue, I can tell you some of the things that hopefully we'll talk about. I'd love to take credit for all the great things that happened under President Trump, but I can tell you that it was a number of people getting involved and sometimes taking that personal responsibility to actually advance the cause of freedom, stand with Israel. You mentioned my passion when I went to work for Congress. I had you know, here I was this guy from North Carolina, nobody from nowhere, going to North Carolina. It is not normally where you look for somebody to be a champion of pro-Israel values. You know, we had one synagogue in my congressional district in Western North Carolina. Generally, most of those people did not vote for me. It was one of those that I wanted to make sure that I did the outreach. But when you do the right thing for the right reason, honestly, it all works out in the end. And these are difficult times internationally. These are difficult times in terms of anytime you have a transition of government, it's difficult. But you add the pandemic, you add a change of administration, you add a change in whether it be tax policy, financial policy, you add a change in foreign policy, and it can create that perfect storm that would bring anxiety even for a guy like me. Debbie and I, we're actually in Palm Beach right now. You know, it's I know it's a tough job, but somebody had to do it, and we're down here. It came down. I was with the president last night. I still call him the president. He's a personal friend, and I'll be meeting with him again tomorrow. But when you look at our passions, I know when I went to Congress, one of the things I told a few people that came in early on, there was some people that were coming up to Capitol Hill, and they got the short straw. They had to come to this new freshman member from North Carolina that was an evangelical, not not of the Jewish faith, and yet my wife and I, every single day that we were in Congress, we would say, what could we do for Israel and what could we do for the Jewish people? And that's our heart. And so that's not something that we take lightly. We're going to continue to be in the fight and look forward to working with all of you. And as we get to know each other better, some of you will, hit the mute button and you'll go on and you'll just say, I've had enough. Hopefully others will keep an open mind and we'll be able to get to know each other better. But thank you so much.
So Mark, really appreciate giving up golf for the president to do a Zoom for Fifth Avenue. I don't know anyone that would do that. Thank you, Rabbi, for your introduction, and thank you, David. So, Mark, I know you're pretty famous and former chief of staff, but if you can tell us your background, what motivated you to become a congressman on a personal level. We knew each other before you were chief of staff, so I want to give others the chance to hear your story.
I was a business guy and actually, one of the few people in Washington, D.C. when I got elected that actually had signed both the front and the back of a paycheck. And I think Congress could do well to have more people that actually understand what it's like to not only create jobs for other people, but in 2010, 2011, we were coming out of, in fact, we were still in a very severe economic downturn. I was real concerned about where our country was headed. I was seeing some of the policies of the previous administration that were extremely concerning to me. And so I really decided that public service was one of the things. I had a very good life. We lived in the mountains of Western North Carolina. I can remember the day I called my wife. I said, I think I'm called to run for Congress. And even though I've been on TV a whole lot and I've talked to different people and I love people, I don't necessarily like the spotlight. And so I can remember that particular day I called her, I said, I feel like I need to do that. And, when you're giving up a great life, our kids were out of high school and into college at that particular point. And I literally got physically ill. I had to pull over on the side of the road and throw up. I didn't want it for me. It was never on my bucket list. And yet, one of the key passions, as I remember telling the head of AIPAC, they bring in all these candidates. I said, I don't want to be an advocate for Israel. And, he kind of was taken back. I said, I want to be a champion. And I'm sure he's heard that a million times. And normally when people are doing that, all they're wanting are campaign contributions. But hopefully throughout my career in the way that I continued to advocate on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people, they saw it with my interaction on foreign affairs. I picked the Foreign Affairs Committee. It's not one that you pick for fundraising. You pick it because you're really committed to that particular cause. I was the UN delegate to the United Nations in the 68th General Assembly. But part of that was because I felt like that the United States and Israel were getting a bum rap in the way that people were voting, in the way that they were. I don't know that there was an anti-Israel, anti-American attitude that still prevails in much of the UN, but trying to get involved with that. And then, so being a business guy coming to Congress, I'm too old. I said I'm too old to wait around. So we figured ways to try to create leverage, try to figure out ways to get legislation passed. And I'm one that I think it was Harry Truman that said it first, but Ronald Reagan is sometimes credited with it. It's amazing how much you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And so for me, it was all finding people that, interestingly enough, there are plenty of people in Washington, D.C. who want to take credit for things. Now, there's not a whole lot that want to take blame for things, but there's a whole lot that want to take credit. And so I would find find ways to work with different people and make sure that we got a number of things accomplished. So it was a great 4 terms. My time with the president was not only stretching but rewarding. I got to work with some great people. Honestly, that President Trump came in. One of the big concerns that a lot of people had was his foreign policy. And I would offer to anybody that's watching here today, I think he was one of the most significant presidents when it came to foreign policy and his accomplishments in the history of our country. And so I've been truly blessed to be part of that.
Great. So there was no one that recruited you. You kind of were successful in business, and you said, I got to step up, and you just followed the process and jumped in and got elected.
Yeah. So it's great question. No, they didn't. I mean, people had talked to me about running for office, but never for Congress. It was really, they didn't expect this business guy to come in and run for Congress. In fact, they recruited other people. I was in an 8-way primary, ended up winning by a considerable margin, an 8-way primary. People want something that's genuine and real. I think all of you know that. And for me, you can play to your constituencies, or you can play to what makes really your passions work. And for me, it was all about what was important, I believe, to the country, important to Debbie and I and our family. And sometimes when you stand up for those values, you take lots of incoming. As my time in Congress, obviously, I took some incoming, but the other part of it is you find rewarding friends. I mean, today I could call 20 or 30 Democrats that I served with and actually work with them on a number of things, because we try to find the things we can agree upon, and the things that we can't. They know I'm going to be a fierce adversary on the values I hold dear. Great question.
Yeah, no, for anyone that knows you knows how sincere you are. So tell us, when was your first connection to Israel? Because you have a superb record of supporting Israel. I don't know any other congressman has done more for Israel behind the scenes. So tell me, when did that passion come about, and give us a little flavor on that.
Well, I've had the passion for quite some time, but I had the passion really for the Jewish people, and had never been to Israel. And so anybody who thinks that they understand the Jewish people in Israel without going to Israel, you just don't. So Debbie and I, on our own dime, actually booked a trip to go to Israel. We had wanted to do that for a long time. So we booked this trip, and we booked it for, I guess it was November of 2012 was my first time going to Israel. And
so you're a congressman then?
Well, I actually, interestingly enough, I had just been elected a congressman, but I hadn't been sworn in. I get sworn in on January of 2013. And so what we figured is that if I lost, we would go and we would have a great trip to Israel. And if I won, we could start the work that was going to be my passion. And so we strategically planted it there. But if you'll remember back at that particular time, there were actually very much unrest in that particular area. The bombs were coming in from Damascus and from Syria. There was a whole lot of missiles, and so I'm now a newly elected guy. I go to our security people that were trying to set, in freshman orientation, they said, raise your hand. How many of you are traveling? And there was only 2 of us. One of them was going to Mexico. They said, that's not our problem. And they said, well, where are you going? I'm going to Israel. And they go, oh my goodness. I mean, they were just going crazy because of the security risk. And at that particular time, as would have it, there was not only some of the terrorist activity that was going on, but there was a lot of threats. They encouraged me to cancel the trip. And I just wouldn't do it. I just said, no. If we allow terrorists to dictate who we are, then we've given up our freedoms. We certainly are in a position. And I said, if the people of Israel have to deal with this each and every day, I can deal with it for 10 days. So we went, obviously fell in love. We've been back several times since. Ambassador Dermer and Rhoda have become great personal friends. When you get to understand more about the connection between the United States and Israel, and how not only we're both fighters for democracy and freedom, but we're called because of that common heritage that we both have. It's very, very powerful.
Great, thanks for sharing that, and that's great. So talking about Israel, one of the things that you and the president did was you stopped the funding for Iran, which was great. And I understand our current president is getting back in as quickly as possible. So can you give us a little perspective on where you think things are going to go now?
Yeah, so I'll give you some perspective on where they may go, and then maybe it's a call to action to everybody that is here that's tuning in, because I want everyone to know that their voice actually does matter. Especially with members of Congress. You get members of Congress, you get them on the phone, a coordinated effort of not only calling in and saying that, and that we don't agree with this, even if you voted for Joe Biden for president, sometimes your voice is even more powerful if you call your member of Congress and you say, listen, we're not in favor of this. So there's a real push, not only to rejoin the Iran, what I call the Iran nuclear deal, but there's a real push to normalize that relationship with Iran. I'd actually met with Foreign Minister Zarif one-on-one early on in my congressional career. It was under the previous administration, under Obama administration, and what I see is a belief to try to normalize nuclear activity and hostile activity that quite frankly does not reconcile with a peaceful nation that wants peace in the region. And so I do see us going back. You've already seen the 60% enrichment threshold. There is no peaceful reason to enrich to 60% uranium to 60%. But it is that aggressive way and the way that they're treating the sanctions and just moving forward with a more relaxed attitude towards Iran. In the midst of, I think what the President Trump did and Jared Kushner and his team were very involved in the Abraham Accords that honestly created a situation that allows us to highlight that activity as abnormal in the region. And so for the Biden administration to be going the direction they are is troubling. I do think they'll find it to be far more complex and far more nuanced. But it's important for us to put the pressure back on there, not just hearing from the government in Israel, but hearing from people in New York, hearing from people in North Carolina or Florida or in between. And the more that they hear that, I think the more that they're willing to perhaps take a slower play. They need to understand that there's not a reward in America for re-engaging. It's not going to make things more peaceful. In fact, I would argue just the opposite.
So I'm happy you brought up the Abraham Accords, which Jared did an amazing job, but you don't see President Biden undoing that. I saw some correspondence, but he's not going to undo that, right?
No, I don't see him undoing the Abraham Accords in terms of going and saying we're going to undermine this particular country or that particular country. Here's what it could do, though. When you're going along a particular direction, I can remember early on Jared talking about all the negotiations he was going to make and be able to make it happen. And I was scratching my head. And I said, well, gosh, this guy, if he can get that done, God bless him. And he did. I mean, it was just,
Hopefully they'll get a Nobel Prize for it. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
he should. I mean, he and the president, you had two things is you had a president that was willing to trust Jared and his team. And I want to stress it was really Jared and Avi and you know, we call him Avia of Arabia. He just did an unbelievable job, but it was those personal relationships that that I've applauded and marveled at. So I don't see it undermining that, but here's where it does undermine it indirectly. When you start to not reward the countries that were willing to take a very bold stand, and I think it's transformational, without a doubt, it's transformational. Then all of a sudden they go, well, gosh, you know, you're rewarding Iran. Instead of, you know, the 5 countries to date that have joined the Abraham Accords. I think more will join. I know if President Trump had been in there, that more would have joined. It was a tenacious agenda that even on the latter days when we brought in Morocco, I mean, it was just each and every day trying to make sure that we added one more to the ranks. But those bold 2 or 3 countries that were willing to step out first, we need to make sure that we recognize that long term. I think we do on Capitol Hill. I think we do on a bipartisan basis with Democrats and Republicans, but we need to emphasize it more.
Okay, thanks. So there are a bunch of issues where a lot of people would like some insight. So I want to start with immigration. I want to talk about what you and the president did and where we're at now and how that could seriously affect, you know, voting going forward. You know, I mean, are you confident we can have another Republican in the White House going forward with all these new immigration policies?
Well, you know, listen, anytime that you look at immigrating a new voting populace, it can be tough. That being said, I don't believe people are necessarily monolithic or all of one mind just because they're coming here. Here's the troubling part that I see with the immigration policy that we have right now on our southern border is just the Biden administration literally does not know how to handle it. I mean, and the volumes of people, the conditions there are worse than I've seen ever. And actually, I want to be clear, I have not traveled down. It's been more pictures and conversations with some of my colleagues who have traveled down since I left the White House. But the conditions that I've heard about from both Democrat and Republican is very troubling. Here's the problem that it creates. It does not allow us to do any kind of immigration reform, whether it's asylum reform, whether it's merit-based immigration, because when you have this porous situation that not only is with immigrants that are coming here illegally across our southern border, it's the cartels, it's terrorists, it's a number of people that are coming across our southern border. So until we define that, we're going to have a much more difficult place. You know, the president was real tough on the border, as we all know. He was, you know, building the wall. His policies were a lot tougher, and yet what we found was an overwhelming sense for people of all backgrounds to support the rule of law. He got a larger share of the Hispanic Latino vote, not just in South Florida, which was just amazing but along the border of Texas and some of these areas that would not have voted, he actually got the votes in a significant way. So my concern is not as much not having a Republican in the White House because of that. It's more of what it will do short term. But to be clear, I think the socialists, the far left on the Democrat side see this as an opportunity to actually tilt the balance in Texas, turn it from red to blue. And then if you do that, obviously you've got New York, Texas, and California. It would be extremely difficult to ever have a Republican president again.
Got it. So how does that affect legal immigration? In other words, and give us a perspective on the numbers. So does this hurt people who file legally to come to the country? Does it delay their coming? How does that work?
Well, here's how it delays it. So there's certain quotas, the numbers that you get that come from certain countries, and you have a greater possibility of getting into the country with a visa from one particular country versus Mexico. If you get in the line in Mexico, it could be 2 or 3 generations before you actually work through it. So indirectly, it does affect it, not only from a number standpoint, but from a quota standpoint, because you have so much of the illegal activity. The other area that it does is people that are willing to look at legal immigration and actually put much higher numbers on that in terms of people coming here. They're not willing to entertain it. So you take a Lindsey Graham or a Marco Rubio, or someone like that that's probably a little bit more moderate on immigration, they're not even willing to entertain a compromise, and so it does affect it. It affects it in one other way as well. I think when we start to see uncontrolled borders, we get concerned from a security standpoint. So one bad story happens, another, they say, well, it's not possible. Obviously, the nation of Israel understands borders better than we do, and you have to have borders to have a country, and you have to have security for all of America. And when that starts to get jeopardized, you get a side problem that comes in. You start to put people in a particular box, or you say, well, gosh, all of this is bad, all of that is good. And that's where I get troubled by it, because we've actually got to be thinking people on how we do it. So the side benefit of an open border is a restraint of people coming here legally, restraint on visas coming here legally, and ultimately a restraint on any reform that we might see on immigration policy.
Right. Also, I think from a COVID perspective, it's not safe, right? I mean,
No.
are they, I mean, they want everyone to wear a mask and vaccinated, but then they're letting in, what are the real numbers? And we'll talk about the COVID part, please.
Yeah, so the real numbers are just astronomical when you look at the numbers in just the first month or so of the Biden administration. We're looking at over 150,000 people coming here across the border illegally. We're looking at tens of thousands of people being released into America without a COVID test. We've actually, with some of our nonprofit work, has worked on a lawsuit that just says, listen, you can't keep countries locked down or cities locked down in the country because you're following CDC guidelines, and yet at the same time have someone come across the border and say, well, you're free to go without a test. Right. COVID positive, you can go anywhere you want to go. And actually, it's even worse than that is some of those that come across, they're able to travel throughout the country without a test and potentially being COVID positive into cities that have greater restrictions on U.S. citizens like you and me.
Amazing. Everyone who knows what you and the president did to get this vaccine, which thankfully most of our congregants have taken. So can you talk about that process? Because it was everyone said, the president's never going to do it. He's full of what. But to tell us how that happened, because it was amazing in the speed, right?
Listen, in 9 months, he went from 0 to vaccine in 9 months, which has never been heard of. The saddest part is because we were all losing loved ones. We were all fighting. No one knows it better than the people of New York, and just the difficulty that we face with this pandemic that seems to have touched a number of people. But there was also someone that got each and every day ridiculed because of the optimism that he shared, the vision that he shared, and lastly, the tenacious way that he got things done. When you look at 0 to 9 months for a vaccine, when everyone, now I'm not saying everyone that was at NIH, FDA, HHS said, it's impossible, Mr. President. And he says, well, we're not going to take that as acceptable. Not only creating Operation Warp Speed, but a lot of work that a lot of the people in the administration were taking on to create one of two things, either a vaccine that we have or a therapeutic, coupling with companies trying to cut through the red tape. And he wouldn't take no for an answer. I will say this, some of the more difficult conversations I had with administration officials were over the fact that we had to advance therapeutics and vaccines at quote warp speed, and they weren't wanting to do that. And yet what we see is when you take the private sector, you get government out of the way, allowing it to be a backstop for safety. Millions of Americans now have been vaccinated, hopefully getting back to normal in the very, very near future. But it was not only the creation of that, it was the delivery of that took place. And everybody saw it as a political thing. Oh, he's just saying that so he can get reelected. I can tell you in the privacy of the Oval Office, many, many times, the stories of people, friends of his that had either lost their life or come down with COVID, people talking about that. It was very personal to him. I can tell you,
He lost a very close friend in New York. I remember the president lost a very close friend.
And this is a guy, the president of the United States, that was calling to check on that particular and multiple people, but I think the person that you're talking to, calling the hospital, how's he doing? Calling friends, how's he doing? It's a president that had a personal concern for America, and is not just his friends, that really allowed this astonishing accomplishment that I think will set the model for how government should respond in pandemics in times future. So everybody wants to be critical. I can tell you that having been there through all of it, it was the most incredible time in terms of what we were at risk at. But also we think we have a template for how to fix it, and hopefully we can work with the Biden administration to help them. But regardless, we're going to put in place something that keeps us from losing loved ones to this kind of difficulty in the future.
Thank you. So I think one of the biggest fears, I want you to educate the group. So court packing. So there have been 9 Supreme Court justices forever. How many years have there been? I don't know the history as well as you do. How many?
Yeah, back to the 1800s. So I think 1860 something, I believe, was when they moved it to 9 justices, and so it's been 9 justices for that entire time. And court packing didn't become an issue until President Trump was able to put some conservative justices on the Supreme Court.
So to tell us the process, is it that easy? So Congress and Senate can just change it? Maybe educate us on where that could go.
Yeah, so the court packing actually is probably the easier thing to get done. They're certainly in the House, they put forth a bill to get court packing done. I don't see that moving, mainly because a lot of people they see the downward spiral that would be. It's amazing that we didn't talk about court packing when there was 9 justices and President Trump was in the White House. I didn't see a lot of the people that are advocating for it now saying, oh, we need to make sure that we have 6 more justices, let Donald Trump pick them. In fact, we all know that didn't happen. And so this is all about politicizing the Supreme Court. It is the most dangerous thing I think that we can do, because then what happens is you pack it to 15, and for court packing, a lot of people just think that means just packing it with a judge that thinks the way that you do. That's not what it means. It actually means increasing the numbers from 9 to 15. So let's say that this administration does that. Well, the next administration that comes in is Republican. I can guarantee you that they'll go from 15 to 24, or they'll start to get a number so that they actually make the judiciary branch political, and but it's scary because it's easier to do than passing legislation.
Are they really talking about 9 to 15? I try not to watch the news; it's so depressing. But are they really talking about 9 to 15? I mean,
yeah, they wanted to add 6 new justices because that way they believe that with 6 liberal justices they'll be able to support liberal kind of jurisprudence coming forward. So that's the most common talk is 9 to 15.
so it sounds like you're optimistic it won't happen. There'll be some people on the other side that will think this is not the right thing to do.
Yeah, so the Republicans, I mean, will be united in their opposition against it. I'm very, very confident of that. But I'm also confident that I'm not so negative in my view that people call and put pressure on some of their Democrat colleagues that all of a sudden they'll see the lack of merit. I mean, listen, the far left will overreach almost every single time, and that's what this is about. But my concern is the far left. They're doing away with moderate Democrats. They're moderate Joe Biden is no longer in the White House. He can't campaign that way, but he's actually in ways being far more progressive, if you want to use that term, than some of the people that he ran against.
Than the voters who voted for him thought 100%. So talk about this DC. They're adding a senator. Can you educate?
Well, there's 2 things you're not supposed to talk about: politics and religion. And boy, we've gotten into both of them here. So when we look at DC, the Constitution was real clear on setting up DC, and DC was supposed to be this hub for the federal government coming out of both Maryland and Virginia. They created this district that honestly they felt like that anybody that lived there would be able to talk to their legislators or the congressmen or senators much easier than perhaps you could from New York or anybody that's tuning in from their respective state could lobby Washington, D.C. I've had conversations. This issue came up before. It came up under the Biden administration. It came up early on in the Trump administration, although no one saw this as really something that a Republican president would sign into law. But under the Obama administration, it came up then. And really, this is, I had a conversation. I said, if you're concerned about representation, we can take the 700,000 people that are in D.C. and we can make them part of a congressional district in Virginia or part of a congressional district in Maryland. And so they could have their representative. But no, it's really about 2 senators changing the total. They would like to have you believe that it's all about representation, but it's really more about trying to make sure that the Senate has 2 more Democrat senators from the District of Columbia, I'm very reluctant to buy into the representation argument, mainly because I've had conversations with some of my Democrat colleagues when this came up 6 or 7 years ago.
So are there other areas where they can do this, or there was 700,000 people that weren't really represented? Is that really what was going on?
Well, that's their argument. Now they actually have a delegate. Eleanor Holmes Norton actually does a very good job of trying to make sure that she carries the message of the people of Washington, D.C. in the halls of Congress. As a delegate, there are certain votes that you don't have the ability to vote on. You do have votes in other areas, but her persuasiveness and her ability to lobby her fellow colleagues is extremely powerful. I mean, for anybody to suggest that Eleanor Holmes Norton is not in the top tier of people who can make things happen in Washington, D.C., they don't know her. And so this whole argument of them not having representation is really not accurate, because they can call Eleanor any particular time. Go ahead.
So how quickly can this all happen? Is this like something that can happen in a couple months?
So I'm not really fearful that it's going to happen unless what they do is they try to change the filibuster rules and move this forward, in the Senate. Obviously the House is going to continue to take this role. They've voted for it. They've passed it. But this is more a messaging bill than, I believe, a bill that we have to be concerned about being signed into law. Although the pressure is going to be great on a few senators to break the filibuster and not have that 60 vote threshold. And yet, I've learned in Washington, D.C. that you've got certain things that go one way and everybody gets all worried about it, while they're working on something that we should be worried about. I'm more concerned about what we're doing from a socialist standpoint, how we're losing truly the values that we hold dear in America. I'm more concerned about that than I am about DC statehood. That being said, I may change it. I'll have to come back on and say, hey, call your senator, call your representative if I see it changing on Capitol Hill.
Okay. So tell us, one of the things that, when I was raised up, we were always supposed to show reverence to policemen. So this whole defunding the police, do you see this as a short-term, a couple of years, or is this going to be a long-term problem?
I think it's a long-term problem. And I think that if we don't fix it, what you're going to have is you're going to have pockets of what I would call police deserts. You're going to have places where you can't travel, where the support for local law enforcement is not there, and so that you'll create these certain areas that literally people will not sign up to become law enforcement officers. The risk is not worth the reward. And my big concern is we've allowed the rhetoric to go way too. Listen, there are bad apples, and there are people that need to be held accountable in every profession. And law enforcement is not to be singled out. As every law enforcement officer is righteous. At the same time, I can tell you that when we look at defunding the police, or when we look at sending in social workers to try to do the job of law enforcement, it is very problematic. I mean, and it's not to downplay the value of social workers and the need for that, but when you have someone that is abusing or domestic abuse in your household, you don't want to call someone to try to actually mitigate that. You want somebody to stop what's going on. Then you work through the mitigation after that. And I'm very troubled with it. I see a trend. I thought it was just a short-term thing that happened and grew exponentially during George Floyd's death. I thought it took on a whole new meaning at that particular point. But it's systemic, and if you ask many of the Democrats on Capitol Hill, their whole attitude about law enforcement is one that is extremely troubling. And so I think we've got to come together in a bipartisan way to do that, not use it as a political weapon, but stand with law enforcement. I can tell you, when I was growing up, we were told to respect, I came from very humble beginnings. You respect the law enforcement. You make sure that, if they're telling you X, Y, or Z, you listen. And we've gotten well beyond that, and it's extremely troubling to me. I do think it's here for a long time, but I also think that it's going to take people having to have a stronger voice that stands up. I happen to be here in the state of Florida. Governor DeSantis has shown unbelievable boldness in a number of areas. You talk about a friend of Israel. Ron and I came in together. We sat right next together. We a lot of times we're a 1-2 punch on stuff. But he's become a governor that's willing to stand for boldness in a number of areas, not just on Israel, but on law enforcement and on the whole woke corporation side of things. It's time for real leaders. And what my message to all the people that are tuning in today: make sure when you see real leaders that you let them know that you appreciate them. I mean, it can be real lonely. I promise you, I hear 10 negative things for every one positive thing. And that's why with David's introduction today, I mean, it warmed my heart, because you treat people certain ways and you don't know what they're saying in the privacy of their home or anything else. And so if you're tuned in, make sure those that are taking bold stands that you call them and let them know. And even if you're just calling their intern, their congressional office or Senate office, and saying, we want to let you know that that we're standing with you. I used to get, on everything that I did, we would take down the number of phone calls that we got, both for and against particular position. And anytime that the number of phone calls in support of something was exponentially greater than the negative calls, we took notice, and so it's important to express that.
No, I think that's a very important message. I think a lot of people don't realize that they actually can have input, and the phone calls make a difference. So that if there's any message today we want to share, I think that's really helpful. Can you talk a little bit about? I just want to make sure we're clear on this. So, in Atlanta and Arizona, we're talking about potentially a voter ID, identifying who you are when you vote, and there's opposition to that. I'm confused. So maybe you can educate.
Well, I think we would all be confused. Yeah, there is opposition to that. Voter ID, it's amazing. Voter ID, and just saying that you need to prove who you are in order to actually get a ballot. I mean, it's the most common sense thing that we would do. It is not a heavy, high bar, for some to say, well, gosh, if you don't have an ID, you wouldn't get to vote. I can tell you, in this day and age, it is very, very, very difficult to find someone that doesn't have to provide an ID for some kind of benefit. And it's not just traveling on airlines. It's not. It's almost anything that we give more information to our Uber driver than we do on most identifications. So there's a real pushback to suggest that it would have a chilling effect on voter turnout. It really, I don't see that. To me, it's a license to be able to continue fraudulent behavior. I can tell you, in the state of Georgia, there were the rolls in the state of Georgia needed to be cleaned up. I think that's the kindest way that I can say that. I mean, I know when we looked at the rolls, it would suggest that over 500 people over the age of 105 actually voted in the November 3rd election. Now, whether there's not that many people that are that old there, right. Now, it could be just something as simple as their birth date was wrong on the voter registration. But, I also know I worked the precincts when I was in North Carolina a long time ago before I ran for Congress. And they'd come in and somebody wanted to vote, and I'd say, well, who are you? Well, I'm David Schoen. And so you'd say, well, thanks, David, you can go ahead and vote. Well, David Schoen may have been a senior, a junior, a third. All of a sudden you got, a son voting for a father. It could be very difficult. And so the voter ID is not a high hurdle. It's something that is common sense, and it shouldn't get the pushback that it is, but it is from the far left.
No, 100%. One other area that is, so, social media has definitely changed communication, elections, let's say, over the last decade. So I'm not getting political, but Facebook, Twitter, they can decide to shut anyone down. I'm trying to understand where things are at now and where we need to get them to. Who's making those decisions at Facebook and Twitter? Is there a council? Is it individual decisions? It's kind of scary that they can shut anyone down whenever they want to.
Listen, if we look throughout history, when you control the media or you control the narrative, whether and back, decades ago or centuries ago, there was no Twitter, no Facebook, but what they were really trying to do, what people throughout history have tried to do, is silence a particular thought or a particular word. It is extremely frightening, and I've never been one that suggests a whole lot of government intervention. I believe limited government is the best form of government. And yet what we're seeing right now is the social media companies are literally controlling most of the news that everyone consumes. So I'll just, let's say you get news on your iPhone or you get your news on your Android or whatever it is. We are more concerned about Sinclair buying out a few TV stations because they would have a monopoly on certain TV markets. And yet the Google, the Facebook, to a lesser extent Twitter, but the Google and Facebook actually control more than 50% of the news that we see in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And so when they're controlling it, when you have someone at a corporate level and they would say, oh, well, we're not controlling this. Well, you don't have to look any further than a number of people that actually have their reach, have their posts taken down. So you actually have a truth teller quote, and I use that quote, air quote, truth teller within social media companies that determining what you should see or not see. And, try posting something that is according to our values and supportive and tells the truth about what's actually happening in Israel or with the Palestinian movement or some of the things there versus some of the things that Iran and others put up. They use it for all kinds of different disinformation, but somehow, a particular point of view politically or anything else needs to be taken out. It's not who we are as Americans. And so we're going to have to, in my opinion, we're going to have to break up the big social media companies to make sure that they don't control over 50% of what all Americans see.
Okay, one last thing. So I saw somewhere, and like I said, I try not to watch the news lately, but Joe Biden has already signed 40 executive orders in 100 days. Maybe refresh our memory. Did President Trump do that? I don't recall that happening. How many executive orders did he sign in 4 years?
Well, listen, we used executive orders. There's no doubt about us using executive orders, but this President Biden has been very, very aggressive in terms of using executive orders. Many of those were to undo things that President Trump put in place. Some of those I believe are unconstitutional. I tell you what we did get when we were in the administration is just a plethora of lawsuits that came our way on each action that we took, whether it was an executive order, whether it was an agency rule or anything else. The Biden administration is using that as their de facto way to legislate. They're bypassing even a democratically controlled House and Senate in order to put forth these executive orders. I see a real pushback. I know we're working in a nonprofit space to actually hold them accountable for some of the unconstitutional things that are going on. But they're actually extremely tenacious in their executive orders. And what I'm concerned about is that whether it deals with police, whether it deals with foreign policy, whether it deals with other aspects of voter integrity, that they start putting things in to set a new norm for us. And if there's one area I'm concerned about, it's the executive orders that seem to be coming at just an unbelievable pace. One every 2.5 days. It's hard to even vet them that quickly through staff sec in Washington, D.C.
So, David, is there anything you wanted the congressman to talk about? David, yeah, I invite the rabbi back. Rabbi, is there anything you wanted to ask Mark about?
Yes, sure. Just two quick questions. And Mark, thank you so much for your time and your insights this morning. But two brief questions. One, there was a recent attack on the Iranian nuclear facility, which everyone's attributing to Israel. I was curious if you had any information from inside information in terms of the Biden administration's reaction to the attack. Were they aware of it? Were they not aware of it? Were they opposed to it? There's not much coming out of Washington about it, and it seems to be a very significant event that took place that was carefully planned for many years, it seems. So I want to know if you have any insight as to how this is going to affect the U.S.-Israeli relations.
Well, Rabbi, great question. I can tell you on that particular one, you would get into highly classified information that I can't share, even if I did know it. I'm not suggesting that I do know. I can tell you this as it relates to Iran or Iran and Israel. It's not just the back and forth there. Israel is right to be concerned about the nuclear response that Iran may or may not pose, but it's even greater than that. If indeed Iran has nuclear capability for nuclear weapons, it starts an arms race in the Middle East because of the Sunni-Shia divide that actually looks at more nuclear proliferation in the region. And so, I'm not able to comment on that particular aspect. I still have a security clearance that would keep me from commenting, even if I did. But before we get out of here, I do want to say one thing, Rabbi, because it's important that all the people from Fifth Avenue understand this. There's a special bond that I have with not only Fifth Avenue, but with the Jewish people. And it's something that brings us together that is greater than Israel and Iran and what may or may not have happened there. And it really is about a heritage that for the Jewish people that have been persecuted in ways that I can't even imagine throughout history. But it's also a friendship and a family that I've been adopted into. This guy that didn't know that much. I thought the Christian faith was very, had different denominations that people, boy, did I get a PhD in religious thought when we come to looking at the Jewish people and what this group is and how they believe. But my passion for Israel and for the Jewish people goes broadly for the Jewish people, whether they believe that Israel is our number one ally and that we should stand, or if they don't, because I was shocked to find that out. But I want to say thank you, not only to you, Rabbi, but to everybody that's tuning in, but more broadly, some of the people that have brought me into their home, where we've had Shabbat dinners together, where we actually, we have a bond that is undeniably strong, that cannot be broken. And it can't be broken by terrorists. It can't be broken by people seeking to do evil, as long as that bond stays together. And so as long as I draw a breath, I think of the friends that I have and the people that have invited me into my home and who have loved me in spite of my flaws. That when we stay together, I want to give hope to everybody if you will stay engaged and seek to do what is good for our country and certainly for the Jewish people and Israel broadly, I think it'll go well.
Thank you, and thank you for being an inspiration. It's a really remarkable, your dedication and your authenticity and your integrity, and thank you for that. And just one last question in terms of American society. So it appears quite obvious that there's a great divide in the country, stern partisan divide, and it seems to be only getting worse in the toxicity of this partisan war that's going on, and how the country seems to be growing apart, not together. So I want to know your thoughts as to the future of the country. It's quite troubling, the dialogue that's taking place right now. It doesn't seem to be getting better. It seems to be getting worse, even with the new administration. So I want to know your thoughts as to the climate of the country going forward.
Yeah, I think the more that we push politics to the forefront of what we're all about, the more divided we're going to get. When we start seeing what we do with regards to our foreign policy in a political realm, when we start looking at immigration in a political realm, that if we just allow more of an open border or closed border, it benefits us politically or disadvantages us politically. When we look at everything in a political context, we're going to have more and more divide. That being said, the pandemic has actually divided us in a lot of ways, but also in ways brought people together that would never have thought about being together. I mean, I can tell you that I don't care if a Democrat mayor gets credit for getting a vaccine to a particular constituency, as long as they get the vaccine to the people at once. I don't care if we've got therapeutics and PPE. I can tell you that my good friend Lee Zeldin up in Long Island, when I was chief of staff and they were running out of gowns and masks and things, I mean, Lee Zeldin was calling me because he had my personal cell phone. And he says, you know, we're in a dire situation. We've got people that are gonna die if we don't get this taken care of. You know, and my response to him was because of who he is and because he's a dear friend of mine, is of course we'll send it. But too many times people say, well, let me look at the politics. You know, what's the makeup of your district? Well, and you start allocating resources from a political standpoint. So here's what I would find is a way to encourage others without the political context. And that's hard coming from a guy who obviously served in Congress and the chief of staff, and I will make political comments, and anybody who's knows me knows that I will not be quiet in my political observations. And yet when it comes to our fellow man, if you're in your neighborhoods, if you spend more time worrying about the fact that their daughter or their granddaughter or their husband or wife is sick, and what can you do? We do that in the South. I know that's unusual for some in New York, but I mean, if somebody gets sick, we go over and you know, we take the pies and the casseroles. In fact, you know, they'll get more food when somebody's sick, or especially if they're dying. You know, that's just what we do. And I know that many of you do that as well. The generosity goes forward. If we can practice more of that and say, oh, well, no, I don't want to go there. I mean, I've had people that, you know, the fact that I served at Donald Trump's chief of staff, they'll get on a plane and they'll say unbelievably, well, less than kind things about me. Let's put it that way. But they don't know me. And why I applaud what you're doing here is hopefully people get to see a little bit about, you know, something about me that they may not have known. But the other part of that is I would leave you with this one thing. Look for the element of truth in every conversation that you have with anybody. Far left, far right, in the middle. There's an element of truth in what something says. Now, it may only be 1%. It may be 99% false and 1% true. But if you look for that element of truth, then what happens is it starts to bring us together, even if it's just 1% or 2% at a time. And so I do think it'll get worse. Part of that is social media. People say things on Facebook and Twitter they would never say to you in your face. They do it from anonymous sources. And the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle that, you know, continues to hit it, they get paid on friction. They get paid on controversy. Hopefully we'll get to a point where, you know, the kinder, gentler stories normally do not sell well on the Nielsen's ratings.
Mark is speaking like a true Talmudic scholar, because in the Talmud there's a concept called modeh al ha'emet. You have to acknowledge the truth, and you cannot let personal interests or preferences or advancement distort one's ability to acknowledge the truth. So you're saying that when everyone would approach situations based on how to resolve the difficulty as opposed to personal interests of advancement, that will potentially unite the country for the better in the future. Thank you.
So Mark, this has been really inspiring. I know I told you it'd be an hour, we're a little bit over, but we hope to have you back either in person when the synagogue's renovated, or if it's not ready yet, and New York won't allow you to come, we'll do a nightly Zoom in the winter. But it's great that you're still active and you're young, and I know there's a lot more to come. And I want to thank you also for the pardons that you helped with the president to get some really good people out, and all your great work. And appreciate the friendship and the mentorship. And David had to run. His father-in-law is a little bit ill, but he says goodbye, and so you guys will stay in touch on that. And special regards to Debbie and your beautiful granddaughters in Atlanta. And stay healthy, and regards. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. God bless.
Okay, have a great day.
All right, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.